Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our first in our series, which we're calling our Get to Know OCC live Q&A series. So how this is going to work, we have different topics for each of these four in the series. Today is Desperate Patient, Curious Provider. So that's the journey we're going to take you on today, the origin story of OCC. So while we're getting into things and sort of painting this picture, telling you the story, ask any questions. So whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can just ask some questions or any reactions or, that resonates with me, or anything you want to share. We'd love to hear it. That would be really fun.
We'd love to be very interactive with everyone today. So
yes. So please chime in. Oh, love to hear more about that, and we'll kind of weave it in, and we'll have time. Also, there's a few things that I'm sure will come up that we will do, like we'll post links after. So after we sign off, we'll kind of go on and post some links for anything that we mentioned that people might want to follow up on. So just know that that's coming. And yeah,
I'm waving hi to my friend Nicole.
Nicole says
actually
hi.
Lovely that Nicole is here because she's part of what we're going to talk about today, which was my desperate search for trying to go into trainings even to enhance and accelerate my own healing. And Nicole was a participant in the body-centered psychotherapy training that I was in, as well as the yoga dance training that I was in. So hi, Nicole, from Nashville, North Carolina. Hi.
Thank you for saying hi, Nicole. Yeah, so everyone, please, and I'll keep, as people come in, I'll keep inviting everyone to just share and be a part of the conversation. So today, what we're here to kind of take you on an 11-year odyssey journey of our beloved Micaela, and how this journey that she went on, Jess coming on board together, they're on this journey that eventually culminated in the creation of what we now call Origins Collaborative Care. So to start, Mick, just paint us this picture. So we frame this as desperate patient, curious provider. So like, bring us back to this place where you are this desperate patient, and what that was like, and yeah, help us feel into that moment for you. This is sort of the before you've met Jess, just for people to kind of get there.
Do you want me to start before that, like to provide a little context?
Yeah, I think even like a little bit about like little you and sort of like, illness things.
Sure.
Hi, Heather Joy.
Hi, Heather Joy.
We're so glad you're here. Yeah, and then getting to this sort of the 11-year period that we're really talking about. But yeah, like what was happening for little Micaela before even these 11 years, and then what happened then?
I mean, overall, I always thought of myself as a relatively healthy person. I would like to talk a little bit about it for people who identify as having mast cell activation syndrome. And here's a peek at one version of what, like the extremely wide range of what that presentation can look like over the course of a lifetime. I was always the 1% person. I always was the one who had the rare thing to happen, the unusual thing. I had a lot of very strange immune related issues as a child. I got sick really quite often and would stay sick for a very long time. Very constant strep throat, a lot of upper respiratory kinds of infections, a lot of really upset stomach a lot of the time, even so much so that I think I was 6. We ended up calling an ambulance for really severe pain with no known cause. So that was a look at my health picture as a little one. Things started to get especially weird in adolescence. I grew breast tissue under my arm. That was benign, but unusual and scary. I had to have it surgically removed. I had some rheumatoid nodules that started growing in my hands and feet. They would grow and then dissolve and grow and dissolve.
Oh, wow.
And biopsy at 15. In retrospect, I think that probably likely had a lot to do with Lyme and also a really severe case of Epstein-Barr mono around that time frame as well. So we're talking about like major blows to the immune system. I grew up in Mansfield, Connecticut, so not far from Lyme, Connecticut, and spent a lot of time out in the woods spying on potential boyfriends and things like that. Shout out to my.
That's for another live stream.
Yeah, that's a different live stream. But yeah, things started to get really weird there. But remember, like also periods of relatively robust health. You know, it didn't seem that out of the ordinary. But then in my 20s, I did have some things that started to feel really out of the ordinary. Very, very prolonged periods of illness, getting sick with an upper respiratory, you know, kind of viral cold, but severe. Every month, like clockwork, usually right before my menstrual cycle, to the point that it really just seemed there must be something wrong with my immune system, but testing did not reveal anything. Some other notable things, there was a point in time where I actually developed a uterine infection. And again, I was the 1% person when they went to biopsy it that I ended up developing a secondary infection on top of that, and required hospitalization actually for like a near septic kind of infection that required antibiotics, IV antibiotics. But my immune system, Jess could speak more about my white count was not elevated. It did not signal testing wise to the medical team what could possibly be happening, especially with that severe of an infection, to the point this was, I think, 1996 that they tested me for HIV. And we were really deeply concerned at the time that maybe this was the reason that my immune system is now responding. Likewise, that was the last time that I ever spiked a fever for 26 years. And the fever was only 100.3. But that was the last time I would ever mount a response that required a fever at the time. And then another
just to give context, like medically speaking, like with that level of infection, Micaela should have had a white count up in the 26 range, and she should have had a fever up in the 104 to 105 range. You know, so her body just was not responding in a way that was like immune competent.
I don't have HIV.
Why the medical people thought, gosh, you must have some massive immune suppression happening. And that's where the HIV test came from.
Right. And yeah, interestingly, like whatever the standard, I don't know what they are, you would probably know, Jessica, but whatever the immune tests were in general came back normal. So another thing, it's in this time frame, like I'm probably 23, so maybe 97, I ended up developing a throat infection that would not clear. It was really extremely severe, extremely painful. Like you could smell it. It was really like horrible. I took every imaginable antibiotic, one after the other. For over 2 months, we tried, and they finally said, we're going to have to go in and take your tonsils out. So I had my tonsils removed at the time. But again, like what is happening with my immune system that I'm not able to fight infection? So
this is sort of like things have been going on. There's some escalation. And then is there a moment where it feels like things sort of precipitously fell into like a sharper decline?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that was still another 15 years probably before that.
Wow. Okay. So there's like a long period. Wow.
And plenty of strange things. Again, with MCAS, strange, unusual, idiopathic, weird, downright weird. Again, this will only happen to 1% to 2% of people, like those types of folks. Yeah. So,
well, and again, from the medical perspective, because some people might relate to that, Micaela, is like, oh yeah, I have the weird things also. I just want to give that perspective that immunologically speaking, healing is immunologic as well as fighting infection is immunologic. And so when there's some actually understandable, when you know it, pattern that's happening, Micaela didn't share, I believe you had a bad hemorrhage 7 days after your tonsillectomy, which is a 1% phenomenon as well. And she continuously had the 1% phenomena. And that really is also consistent with this immunologic challenge that arises in the presence of mast cell activation, chronic mast cell activation. So if that's useful for anybody to be able to dig further, we just want to share that.
Yeah, and even for those of you who aren't familiar with MCAS, this is one of the reasons it took so long. One of many, many reasons it took so long to diagnose this with me. I didn't have allergic type phenomena. So this is really important. I did not have hives. I did not have anaphylaxis. I was not having problems that I was aware of with food. Like none of that obvious presentation that we think of in terms of mast cell was happening for me. However, when you understand what mast cell activation does, one of the things is growth and development, human tissue growth and development. Those mast cell mediators are integrally related to any form of tissue growth and development. So when the mast cells are releasing mediators at a rate that is too much, it is aberrant and too much, then of course that's where you end up with, you'll hear there's even more of that, tumors and adenomas and weird growths and extra tissue and cysts and fibroids and endometriosis and vascular anomalies, all sorts of things like that. So, these are all the unknowns that we're not able to have any context for understanding why they were happening really until very late in my journey. So, but that all of a sudden makes sense. So about 15 years later, I had moved into a home that unknowingly had really high levels of mold. At the same time, there was some really significant relational trauma happening in my life. And, my threat level, my sense of threat, my own personal sense of threat around what was happening and circumstances that felt deeply out of my control was really pronounced. And so my health started, to some just weird things, paresthesias and weird, all of a sudden I'm getting urinary tract infections again, really severe, and having trouble fighting them off, and like odd patches of numbness and tingling, things like that. So that's where it started. And then I ended up waking up one morning with really severe neurological, very severe vestibular neurological, strange eyesight and balance issues, really, really odd. So that's really where the things start to take a turn. And I would say that odyssey begins. I actually am remembering that there is like a preamble to this health collapse, which is that the year before I was having really severe unexplained pain that turned out to be something called pelvic congestion syndrome. And at the time, it was not recognized by conventional medicine. Yet again, like another scenario which it is widely accepted now. It's been established very clearly. Something else called nutcracker syndrome, again, vascular in nature. And when you understand that this is a really common thing in MCAS folks, but vascular in nature and causes this flank pain. But both things are accepted now and were not at the time. So it was a really desperate attempt at trying to figure out what was causing the pain. And so this happened the year before. So I'll add that just as but the real collapse that it was pretty progressive from that point forward, happened in 2011.
And then in this period, like before you've met Jess and things are starting to really unravel, just sort of like both a little bit, and Jess will speak to medically, like, who's this patient that she's meeting and what's going on with her. But like, yeah, what was your life like and your relationships, or sort of like that picture of this, like the, this desperate situation that you found yourself in.
Yeah. So there's 6 years that happen after this point before I meet Jessica. And I really don't have the words I'm a little teary thinking about it. That's funny that would happen here.
Okay, lovely.
Yeah. Extraordinary suffering. There were like small windows of time where I felt relatively okay and was able to be with my family and enjoy life a little bit. Okay, but it was actually really quite devastating, because it would seem like I was getting better and maybe making a return to health, and then inevitably something would happen and it would collapse again. I was in and out of the hospital constantly, in the emergency room constantly. I had really severe and extremely large kidney stones that took many, many years to understand why I was having those, and many, many surgeries and stents and experiences like that. Tons of neurological problems and admissions there. And did I have MS or did I have a brain bleed? misdiagnoses and things like experiences like that, and really, really frightening misdiagnoses, actually. So a lot of those experiences, hospitalizations, in the meantime, my gut completely shuts down. I'm having really very severe GI issues and being scoped, endoscopy, colonoscopy. Eventually we end up understanding that I have celiac disease as part of that, but there was certainly more, and that is not the only thing that was causing that problem. But all of it really a mystery, like not very understood. I'm trying to think if there were other things, but it turns out eventually I was diagnosed with something called hyperparathyroidism, which is these glands that are adjacent to the thyroid, and they control calcium in the blood, and they're very militant about making sure there is a very precise level of calcium in the blood, and will do just about anything to maintain what it feels is homeostasis. When you have an adenoma, it actually adjusts the dial so that it's incorrectly calling for more calcium than is needed. And so it was leaching my bones. I have osteoporosis in my spine, actually, from that. So that's where the huge kidney stones were coming from. And hyperparathyroidism can cause, a ton of really miserable symptoms, including neurological symptoms and all sorts of other things, twitching and muscle, all sorts of MS-like. So when we discovered this, it was like, oh, we found it. Thankfully, finally, this is, and I had that surgically removed, and it did improve things to some extent, but that was not the only thing. Again, an adenoma could be explained by mast cell activation syndrome. Again, a lot of testing, just excruciating pain, a lot of suffering, severe migraines, 22 to 23, 24 days of the month, excruciating pain. Other kinds of physical pain, fibromyalgia type pain. I could just go on and on. A lot of vestibular issues, just made my world very small. I felt very sick, very exhausted, a lot of very bizarre symptoms. One that comes to mind, when I moved my eyes horizontally, I would get an electric shock, in my face and neck. What is that? Right? Things like that. Eventually having even like limb paralysis and things like that were not explained. And again, pretty much every year by the end of January, I had already been admitted to the hospital or seen in the ER. And that was the year. It seemed like it would never stop. And it just kept accelerating, really getting worse and worse. So by the time that I met Jessica, are we going there?
And well, there's a little bit that I believe you had been finding your way into some mind-body trainings, interventions, like, okay, my health, like my world is like, how you're trying to dig your way out of this, and finding
somebody in the ER, Mick.
Yeah.
No, actually, it was a neurologist. Yeah, actually, it was the first year that my health had collapsed and I was having these really severe neurological symptoms. It would probably take a long time to give context for the story I'd love to tell, but really about how a year after this onset happened, that I ended up being in the car right around the exact time it was spring, that this really my health, this waking up with all of these neurological symptoms happened, and that I was in the car and all of a sudden they all came back, and I assumed that whatever was happening then was happening again. Through the lens of understanding the autonomic nervous system and how familiar cues from the environment, daffodils, Easter, my daughter's birthday, spring, the way the air feels, those familiar cues are all part of a constellation of what the autonomic nervous system serves up as, like, this was highly traumatic and threatening to you last year. Remember, daffodils may not be safe. Watch out. Be careful. And part of how it communicates that is through symptoms, familiar symptoms from before. And this is not a psychological phenomenon. This is not psychological. This is physiologic. It is there to help you. It is designed to alert you to a potential threat. But this is where something has gone awry, where we're not able, there has been so much for the autonomic nervous system to have to deal with for so long that it is now unable to accurately perceive its threat level in the present, which is also incidentally what mast cell activation syndrome is. It's the most primitive immune cell's inability, because of too much, that it loses its ability to identify what's really a threat and starts reacting to benign things. So I did find my way to a neurologist. We went and had an MRI again. We rushed me over to Mass Gen to be evaluated again. And the very kind but very stern neurologist, I had a lovely neurosurgeon as well, but a neurologist brought me into his office away from my family. He wanted to speak to me privately. And he said, "Do you have any childhood trauma?" And the blood ran cold in my whole body. And I really want to say this very clearly because I think there are probably other people who can relate in different ways, especially around this. Is it in my head or is this actually happening to me? But in that moment when he said that, I really wanted to die. I would have preferred any other. I wished he had said at that moment that I'm sorry, it's terminal and you don't have any time. Because to me, the idea that what I heard was that I had made this all up in my head, that I was experiencing these symptoms. It really was all in my head. I was humiliated and embarrassed. I had so much shame still about my childhood and my history that I just felt like, oh, I was broken. And, it just flooded me with shame. And so he said, "This is not in your head." I heard, "It's in your head." He said, "Do not change any of the medications or the regimen that you're on right away." I went home and immediately stopped all of the medication, and to my detriment, it worked out very poorly. So it was the beginning, though, of like, okay, he said, I don't know why. We don't really know why. This was, remember, a while back. We don't really know why. He didn't know why. It was common for people with childhood trauma to experience things like this. And so unfortunately, he wasn't able to give me enough context to work with it in a loving, gentle way, which is what we do very, very intently. But it did at least like open a door for me to do some of my own exploration. It eventually led me to, for example, going to a Bessel van der Kolk workshop. He was the first person who helped me understand this is physiologic, not psychological. And it just like opened a little bit of compassion for myself and what I was experiencing, and that I felt it was so out of control to me when I had always felt in control of myself prior to that point. And then I went more deeply and more deeply. I learned about the ACE studies, which it's a huge, we'll put links in the chat later. But the ACE study, if anybody is wanting to learn more, it's really about a series of 10 adverse childhood experiences that they were able to study. It was a Kaiser Permanente study of 26,000 people that really established for the first time, really obviously, that if you had the more of these experiences you had, the more likely it was that you would experience complex inflammatory health conditions as a child or later in adulthood. So I was learning about that and doing a lot of research, and really I had become convinced that my childhood trauma was affecting my health picture. And so I went in earnest in search of healing through that path, pursuing not only my own body-centered psychotherapy, but training in body-centered psychotherapy and embody yoga and, yoga dance and all sorts of modalities around that kind of healing.
And in terms of where, this story goes and where we know the story goes, because OCC exists and we're all here for that, insights and gaining things, but sort of windows open, and you're still very sick, right?
Extremely sick. Mm-hmm.
And so let's move to the moment of you meet someone named Jessica Jimison. And then we'll switch to like, Jessica, medically, what are you seeing in front of you? But do you want to, is there anything else, Mick, or do you feel?
Yeah, I think I'll take a quick moment to mention, like, it just so happens when I met Jess, I had been through my last, I had this surgery, but I still had remaining huge kidney stones left. That one got obstructed and infected. And so in January of that year, I was admitted again, requiring IV antibiotics and a stent and surgical removal and all of this related to this kidney. Remember, always the left kidney and repeated assault and injury to this kidney over a long period of time. I'm mentioning it because what ended up transpiring, I would not know this for many years, was that I developed neuroplastic pain in this flank area. So in other words, after the injury had healed, after there was no more problem in this area, I still continued to experience really acute pain in the flank that I pursued with rigor to try and find a solution for. I was seen by OBGYN. Did I need to have a laparoscopy? Was there something happening internally? Explored by urology again. What is going on that is causing this pain? And it was so persistent. And what happens with neuroplastic pain is it becomes more global and diffuse over time. And that's exactly what happened. That pain migrated down into my groin. It eventually migrated into my vagina and rectum, and then up into my sacrum and lower back. So it was the most excruciating level 10 plus pain that I had ever imagined in my life. I was then admitted finally to Bay State. They thought maybe I had MS, and I was being tested for that again. I ended up being put on a fentanyl patch. Tests revealed nothing. I was in this excruciating pain. I got a nerve block, a pudendal nerve block, which should have theoretically ameliorated that pain. It did not, because it was neuroplastic pain, but very real to me. It is still the same pain signal that is creating the same pain. Again, physiologic and extremely real, not psychological. And so when I meet Jess, I am completely desperate. I was being seen at my family medicine, and Jess happened to be working at this family medicine practice. And they were like, this is outside of, I don't know, we need to do Mayo or something, but we do have this functional medicine provider upstairs, and maybe you could go see her. And I will say that I felt extremely dismissed by conventional medicine, that I had some really positive, wonderful experiences in this mystery realm of not having tests reveal anything to explain what was happening. But I experienced a lot of arrogance, dismissiveness. It's in your head. Please see a psychiatrist, etc. And it was a grueling, brutal time. So when I meet Jessica, this is a really critical moment for me, because frankly, I had many periods of feeling desperate enough to be suicidal, because over years and years and years, I know this is a sensitive topic for a lot of people, myself included, but this particular time, I saw no path out. I saw no way forward, and I knew I could not live in this kind of pain. So I really was extremely desperate at this point.
And just to say that our culture so focuses on, if you're in a bad medical spot like this, you go to the doctors. And if your doctor doesn't know, then they send you to specialists. And at some point, you're going to find the specialist who can help you. And of course, Mick, you did pursue that avenue down countless specialists. I mean, I reviewed countless specialist notes on you, and scans and labs, and some places you had diagnoses and some places you didn't. But that is the way that we are acculturated, is go to the doctor until you get the answer and the help that you deserve. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really critical to hear you say you weren't getting those answers and that help that you were desperately needing, and people were running out of options.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you say it, because I remember so distinctly, of course, someone would figure it out. Of course, someone will figure it out. And how that waned to the point that this is a moment you all have heard this, my team, but at one point waking up paralyzed, but all four limbs paralyzed, if one can imagine this, and not seeking out any medical care, because I had lost so much faith. I had already had every scan. I had already had, thankfully I came through that relatively quickly. It was only 45 seconds or so, but still really alarming. But, most people would call an ambulance and get a workup. And, that gives I think a real peek at how much I had just lost faith completely in anyone's ability to help me. And also it had become a trauma in and of itself to seek care.
Right.
People looking at my chart, and then I'm immediately dismissed and diagnosed as head case. When even people who had been my provider and really going to bat for me and working hard had lost faith. And then I was a somaticizer, or someone who was really just looking to be sick, when anyone who knows me deeply knows that I was working so hard to figure out how to heal, working so hard, making every imaginable change, changing my diet, changing my sleep patterns, really working, doing whatever people recommended to heal. And so, yeah, it was, it did a number on me, it did do a number on me psychologically. Eventually, I'm feeling extremely withdrawn. I don't know what to tell people anymore. I don't trust that people are believing me anymore. I'm not 100% sure I believe myself anymore. I know what I'm experiencing, but I'm not, without any explanation, I'm not entirely sure myself. So just really holding that and being terrified and alone. And, we'll talk about this from a polyvagal lens. My world, me as an extrovert who loves being around people and loves being cared for and caring for others, and my world gets extremely, extremely small, and I'm scared, and I don't trust myself in relationships to others, and I know I can't even consistently, reliably show up as a friend, so I don't even try. I don't want to be letting people down anymore. And then frankly, this does carry over into family and friends, these attitudes of not being certain. I remember facing that really very clearly, very clearly. So it is extremely painful. And this is the experience of a lot of our members. It takes time and it happens, and it's understandable. No one is to blame here for having these like confusing feelings, especially we've been, as Jess said, acculturated to believe that there's an explanation for everything and it can be diagnosed and treated. And so, people don't know how to care anymore and don't know how to stay with it. And they don't know if they should believe you or not. I mean, it really is a painful thing for everybody involved.
And feeling helpless feels terrible,
Yeah.
So the friends and the providers who were not able to help you and not able to, know what to do for you to get you out of your suffering, like that was awful for them also. And from a polyvagal lens, we know that, we all have our own protection responses to such experiences. And, I love that one of the things that we have long been talking about, Mick, is like, if only people did have more tools in their toolbox, they wouldn't end up communicating to a patient who's trying to find answers and get well. There's nothing wrong with you. You need a psychiatrist, because they wouldn't feel so inadequate and going into their own protection states. And same with friends in a way. It's like if we had more polyvagal knowledge in the world, we could sit with each other longer in these places.
Well, and if I may, this is really what you, without even knowing about polyvagal,
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, did so beautifully for me. I mean, I think it's really important that even without having the biological, physiologic, science-based understanding of how or why, what I experienced with Jessica was someone who just so obviously believed my experience, believed, I don't know, you were for some reason able to sit with the discomfort of not knowing and were able to honestly tell me so. But somewhere in that felt like safety and trust for me. And also this like deep belief, which I now have for my people, that somehow this makes sense and somehow your body has the capacity to heal. And so when I talk about how Just really saved my life, Just saved my life by being that person for me when that was falling away in my life, so in some cases due to my own like fear of being rejected, right? Not wanting to blame anyone, but just that I had this anchor of compassion, of deep listening, of believing, someone who was curious and interested and honest and able to sit with that discomfort of not knowing. And that lasted for several years. Ultimately, we pursued many avenues of trying to get me well. And somehow you stayed fervent in believing that I would be able to heal somehow, some way. And you were right. And I've seen it again and again, no matter how dark and deep and hopeless it gets. I think we're going to touch on that. You can come back from anything. You can come back from virtually anything. The body is incredible. So that is something that Jess understood and did really well for me. And so, from a polyvagal lens, I needed that desperately. When you need connection, you cannot do this alone. Being alone is actually further diminishing my system's capacity for being able to digest and assimilate food, to eliminate, to detoxify. My immune function so sluggish and poor in some ways, hypervigilant in others, right? All of these physiologic functions are governed by the autonomic nervous system. And as mammals, feeling safe in relationship to others is one of the critical things that turns on that capacity for all of the healthy physiologic function. So I needed that so desperately, and I'm so grateful I was receiving it from Jess.
And so I want to make sure that everyone knows that it wasn't that I had any medical answers for Micaela. That wasn't what was happening. I really did not know what was wrong. And in fact, there was a Saturday when I was the provider on, when Mick came at the end of the Saturday hours and stayed, I think for 5 or 6 hours, we sat. And, I knew I couldn't do it in a regular visit. So we just opened up, the rest of the day, where I had Micaela tell me all of these weird health things that you guys just heard a smidgen of. And I think I had 8 pages of notes of this chronology of her kind of strange medical history. And I sat there and I said, I know that all this weirdness it holds the hint of what it is that ties this all together. I know it does. I don't have a clue what it is. And I carried those 8 pages of notes around with me for a long time. I read them multiple times. Each time Micaela found something new, because she was working diligently all the time, reading everything available, finding articles, finding books, and she would send them on my way. And so I would look at them when I could, and I'd look back at this chronology of all of her things and try to make sense of it. And I couldn't make sense of it. I could not. At the time that I met Micaela, I was a relatively new functional medicine provider. I think I'd had a lot of my foundational education, but not actually, kind of been in the trenches doing strictly functional medicine for really any time at all. I think I was just starting to do only functional medicine. There's still a lot of family practice. And in my particular functional medicine education, we really learned the science of the body. We really learned the foundational things, but we didn't learn how to approach intense detoxification from mold or from heavy metals, or, too much about kind of like the deepest of immunology processes. A little bit about the capacity of a person to have chronic infection, which regular medicine training doesn't teach you, but not exactly how to kind of navigate that. So there was a lot of additional learning that Mick led me to. She called and said, I realize this has to be mold. This house has mold in it, and this is when these neurologic symptoms happened. And so I think mold is like the problem. At the time, we were still on this, like, it could be a problem.
There's the answer. Yeah.
Answer. And mind you, I'm acculturated in the conventional medicine model too, right? Like,
of course,
yeah, I'm trained in it. So it's like, yeah, I still definitely fell into a lot of those holes along the conventional medicine kind of reductionistic belief system, I guess I'd say. And, I learned intensely about mold, as did Micaela. We did it together. We learned stuff together. And we tried treating mold. And, the ways that there is to treat mold made Micaela even sicker. So we realized, okay, she can't do it that way. So she did her own awesome mold sabbatical, and got way better by getting herself out of mold and getting herself exposed to nature, and, getting it so she could really ingest great food and, kind of like purify her body in a way. And so that was great for a period. And then other things would come up. She wasn't all the way better, of course. And so other things would come up. And so we kept on learning.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important. Like it isn't so much mold, but my immune system, right? This is, and how the mast cells respond to mold as a pathogen, right? So and why is it that some people can live in that same house and continue to still live in that same house and are doing okay, right? Is it affecting them? Certainly, but it is not affecting them the way that it was affecting me. And so this is part of understanding this. I had done that mold sabbatical, and it was profoundly helpful, and I was feeling a lot better. And then again, I encountered another a period of relational trauma. And so this was really significant. I was aware that my health felt precarious, that I had been feeling so much better, but that I was actually feeling it in a new way, how this trauma and what was awakened, my old childhood trauma being awakened in me, felt really dangerous. It felt extremely dangerous. I was aware at that time. Of course, I had no understanding of how scientifically, biologically, physiologically, what would have been changing and turning off as far as healing and repair, and where all of the resources in my body would have been reallocated away from digestion and absorption and immune function, right? I didn't learn that until later. I just knew that this was not good. And I tried very hard to protect my space. But again, in retrospect, it took, again, a lot of time to piece this together, but it was quite obvious that I had a lot of chronic neurological Lyme symptoms that I probably have had. Again, I think my original Lyme exposure was probably in childhood. We live in an endemic area. Most of us have acquired a tick bite that had the Borrelia spirochetes, right? But our immune system can manage it. Most people's immune system can manage mold. I ended up having really acute symptoms of Babesia show up again because my immune system had been suppressed to a point where it could no longer effectively beat back that Babesia virus, and so, or rather bacteria. And so, then all of a sudden I have symptoms of that, just really further complicated. Imagine a very, very stirred up glass of sediment that is just, how do you sort through anything? Because there's so many different symptoms occurring at the same time.
Can you bring us to this moment? So you've been working with Jess, and then this moment where you go to a place called Sonavive that we don't need to get into. We can share some links and things. But then how from that kind of even more like another tipping point, and then and sort of the beginning of your pathway to learning about the autonomic nervous system and polyvagal theory. So can you bring us to that?
Do you want to say something small, point? Jess, about just where I was at that particular?
Yeah, like the level of severity that.
Yeah. So again, from my both functional medicine, along with all these additions that Micaela's actual life and case, I don't think of people as cases, but it's like, I was learning as if though from a case study, right? But it was really Micaela's real life that I was learning from, with like mold and heavy metal detox and chronic infection treatment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so with all of that and all of my Western medicine knowledge and education and capacity to kind of dig through, which for anybody that doesn't know, my early nurse practitioner experience was on an Indian reservation where you have very limited resources. And so as the primary care provider as a primary care provider, I wasn't the only one, on an Indian reservation within Indian Health Service, you end up becoming all of the specialists as well, because we didn't have access to pay for specialists. And so in other words, it fell to me, and I mean, I gobbled this up. It goes with my personality to like dig and dig and dig and dig. So if something wasn't already within my capacity, I dig for it. I contact people, I read stuff. And
we have a great video on our YouTube where Jess beautifully explains all of this that I encourage everyone to watch. It's very lovely.
Thank you, Christine. You made it in my hot yard one day.
Yes. You can hear more of Jess's piece. It's really great.
Anyway, that's just who I am, I think, is kind of pursuing in that way. And so Micaela's distress, which was palpable and severe, had me really, really working to figure out what is available for her. Obviously, I don't already know it, but what is available? And so at some point I needed to step back and say, like, no, seriously, Jess, what do you know that's available? And as I poured through all of the specialist reports and everything, the truth was that Micaela didn't have a path forward to healing that anyone that I could identify would know about. And she did have unbelievable discomfort, stress, distress, serious suffering. And the one thing we have available is hospice care to help get her comfortable, because there was no way we knew how to help her. And I don't know, Mick, if I really should have said that to you or not. But I think that it was a bit validating for you at the time to hear, oh my God, nobody knows what to do with me, and I am actually suffering.
Yeah. And there was, it's so much more than suffering, because it implies, like, just to paint a picture, it's like I was having incontinence every day at 6:00, like, these very, like, episodic blindness, again, paralysis, all of these strange, debilitating symptoms that didn't allow me to take care of myself or my children. So it really was, we're really just touching the very surface of what was happening at the time. So I had heard a really lovely, it was a Mark Hyman podcast with the clinical director at a place called Sonaviv, which is really the only functional medicine hospital in the world. And it felt like Mark Hyman had my chart out. At this time, we had determined that there was chronic Lyme. We had determined that there was Babesia, like perhaps others. It turned out I had Ehrlichia also, and Bartonella. But the mold piece, it just sounded like, oh my gosh, this might be a place that could help me. That this is, things had reached this severity point where I had no other options here. And so really in learning and researching, reaching out to other people online who had been there, who had been treated, were they having success with it? It felt like a last resort option. It was something I personally had no money for. I was really blessed that my mom was really in that place of, like, I want to do anything I can to save your life, and, invested everything that she had to help me to get there. And then we actually did a GoFundMe, which was the most vulnerable, painful thing to ask for that kind of support, especially at that time when, again, I was really so feeling so isolated and afraid of that kind of connection. It was a healing experience in the end to do that and to see how many people rallied around me. But I ended up going for 3 weeks to this functional medicine hospital. It's about an hour south of San Diego in Rosarito, Mexico. It's an extraordinary facility, and it was great. And one of the things that they really wanted to do was to help me fight off the tick-borne infections that were so obviously compromising my whole system. Yes, some detoxification, which in 3 weeks you can only barely scratch the surface on, but a lot of support, a lot of nutritional support, a lot of holding, a lot of all of these things. They have a really very progressive way of approaching, and very effective way of approaching tick-borne illness, bacterial infection. And so, we were able to get me there for that kind of care. And it was profoundly helpful. It was, in 3 weeks' time, I showed up in a wheelchair and was dancing in the lobby as I exited, which did not imply that I would be dancing for the next several months. I was really having a very difficult time once I got home, but still improving. It just gave me a boost up the ladder, so to speak. It helped me to be well enough that I could then take the ball and run with it to some extent. And one of the things that Sonaviv really helped me with, they had a brilliant healer there, energetic, really somatic, did a lot of powerful, potent work, something called neural emotional technique, and another thing called body code and emotion code. And she really combined those things with her own healing, but had some really profound clearing of old trauma and old, really, like, held beliefs that were holding me back. One in particular around hopelessness that set me on a course of really very fiercely protecting my psychic space and my belief in my own ability to heal during a very, very difficult and challenging time after we got home. And this is what I see quite often with people who go to Sonaviv. I ended up staying connected in that community and reaching back to help others, as others had helped me when I was in that really scared, uncertain place about going. And something that I saw again and again and again is that people would go, And they would come home and they would inevitably have experiences like mine where you still continue to have symptoms and you still don't feel that well. And it's like taking time for your body to heal. And of course, there's tremendous fear. Again, when you have a history like mine or like so many other people, there's tremendous fear. This didn't work. I spent, what now? Like I spent all of this money. What, like, and it becomes very quickly, we're back in that extremely acute state of protection where we're terrified that it did not work. So I was seeing that again and again and again with other folks, and was experiencing that myself, but was able to somehow stay really, really rooted in that the only option is that I heal. Somehow, some way, I'm going to just stick with this and really protect my.
So bring us into how, from this space, you start making these connections of like, there's something with the vagus nerve here, or like, what's this? And that learning that brings you into polyvagal theory that then like helps so much come into place for you.
Well, this is no small thing, but I will just mention that in having cleared some of the other things that were happening, removing some of those symptoms, because I was recovering from Lyme and the other tick-borne things, having an easier time with detoxification. I was out of mold now. I'm living in a healthy environment. So in having removed some of those symptoms, that what remained, and that eventually led to the MCAS diagnosis. And really, I will just quickly say, this is the diagnosis when we talked about meeting for 6 or 7 hours and having this like 8-page list of my history. This is the diagnosis that was like, oh my gosh, there's one explanation that has made sense of everything. So I'm not broken in 900 different ways. I don't have poor protoplasm. I'm not like, it's like, oh, there's this. So of course we went head first into learning more and more and more and more and more about MCAS and how prevalent it is and how people do go. Usually the average right now is 20 years without a diagnosis. So that's huge. And how the arc of MCAS would look. And again, remember, for the longest time, I didn't have any allergic type phenomena at all. Eventually I did, but I didn't for most of that time, even though I certainly had MCAS, at least as into childhood. So there's that. But then you're asking about the polyvagal piece, which is obviously the most critical piece that we'd love to talk about as we rush it into the last 5 minutes.
Well, and then the MCAS piece, right, that unlocks more opportunities for healing. And as you're, there's some settling happening, and then you're coming into this understanding of the autonomic nervous system, so tell us that piece and how that brings even more layers of healing.
Yeah. So I think, remember, just to tie in like this, learning about, okay, trauma, it's correlated with illness, right? All of this, but I never understood why exactly, right? And I am somebody who's highly scientific. And what is the biology? What are the processes that are happening? And to start, Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief there's a chapter or two in there that is just blew my mind wide open and helped to really explain. You are moving toward health, growth, and restoration, or you're in protection. And in polyvagal, it would be you're either in safety and connection or you're in protection. And that really is true. Your physiology can do one or the other and not both at the same time. Jess, do you want to quickly touch on that biology? Or is that adequate?
That's adequate. Yep.
Okay. So this is
the word from our last live stream is, as Stephen Porges would say, neuroregulation of the organs or neuroregulation of survival mechanisms. I mean, that's really
the body only has enough energy to run one or the other.
Yeah. And when it perceives threat of any kind, even running late or being in a traffic jam, sadly, all of those resources get allocated away from healthy physiologic function and including healing, repair, cell turnover, all of that. So holding that and having a lot more understanding of that, and it really had a lot to do with continuing to support and work with people who were coming home from this experience at Sanofi. A lot of these folks, there were other folks too, but and encountering this same, they had the most extraordinary, exceptional, adequate treatment they could possibly have, but then we're having this profound trauma, terror experience in their system. And I was listening to people describe all sorts of things like apnea and syncope and things that had to do with the vagus nerve. Tons of GI trouble, of course, all sorts of, MCAS being what we have really made a direct link that people with autonomic nervous system dysregulation inevitably have mast cell activation, whether you have the syndrome or not, because every time we go into a stress response, the mast cells degranulate and they are pouring their mediators out into your system. And so they really go hand in hand. And so I was seeing people who didn't know themselves that they had MCAS or were having mast cell activation as part of their picture. And so it was through that and really making this, it's like out there now, the vagus nerve, we keep hearing about it. It's like, what is this? But this is what led me down to finding and uncovering Stephen Porges's pocket guide to polyvagal theory. And that was my head first dive into learning the physiology of polyvagal theory and the autonomic nervous system and how it controls all of this. So all of a sudden, everything made sense.
And through Stephen Porges, you found Deb Dana's work, right?
Right.
And
so
you're
there's
starting
the science,
to
here's the theory, here's
try
what makes
it out.
Yeah. But then how do you apply it? What do you do about it?
Right.
Okay, great. Now we understand it, but what do you do about it?
Interesting science. Now what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, by this time, we're in the pandemic. So I'm all online. And I realized Micaela contacts me for some refill of something. And I look in her chart and realize, I haven't seen you in a long time. You haven't seen any provider in a long time. We need to have a visit so I can document enough. And as it turned out, she had been getting better and better and better and better. And so she'd been really applying these polyvagal exercise processes that she was learning about in this context of understanding the physiology of healing or illness. Mm-hmm. And, she shared with me this information. And so, when she was so sick, we were sharing so much in terms of digging and learning. And then kind of life happened for a year or something around the pandemic. And I had my head down working and she had her head down healing and learning. We came back together and ended up really being able to discuss how imperative it was that we get this information out further, that more providers understand what is going on, making people so sick, so that many more people can get well and at least have a safe encounter, with their providers, have their providers, know the foundation of this. So anyway, that's how we originally started talking about what eventually ended up morphing into us becoming OCC together.
And I just say, I think like all of the people that almost virtually all of the people that come to see us are coming for physical healing. And that was my case too, right? Of course, I wanted to heal physically. What polyvagal provided was not only did I it completely changed my life. It completely and totally changed my health, my resilience, how robust and robust and resilient, being able to experience that I could push myself and do all sorts of things and not have, blowback from it. And, it really was just a very, very different level of health than I had almost ever experienced before. And but the beauty of it is the ways that it enriched and opened up a new way of being in my body that had less to do with physical health, the way that we think of it, but how I'm able to relate to people, how I'm able to be a safe, reliable mother, how I'm able to, get a curt text and not immediately interpret that and start ruminating about whether or not someone's upset with me, how I can make a mistake and come and earnestly apologize and take responsibility and still feel like I'm a good, decent human being and not have it stay with me in the middle of the night or the next day to receive criticism and to be able to tolerate that in a way, to be able to set boundaries for myself and know that I'm still okay and lovable. Like these are all like profound, major things that have improved the quality of my life in such dramatic ways. And that's just like barely scratching the surface. So polyvagal theory really is, it's about physiologic health. It's about mental and emotional health. It's about spiritual health. It's about our social health together as mammals who depend on one another for survival. And what does that mean?
Absolutely.
And yes, exactly. And in our next live streams, we're gonna get into both Micaela Micaela, I just want to say thank you so much for just being so like open and vulnerable with us and your story. And I feel like I think I know your story because I didn't know Micaela at the time. And each time it's like just feeling into, it's just such a gift that you can share with all of us this whole odyssey and bring us alongside you. So I just want to appreciate you because it's not easy to be so vulnerable and to go through all of that again, right? Like
yeah. And there were so many losses. It was, it is painful. There were so many losses. I lost my marriage. I lost like my family. Yeah.
I just want to.
And yet, it truly is the greatest gift I could have ever received. I know I say this to our people. I am so sincere in saying that had I not experienced it the way I experienced it, what it brought me in my learning and the healing that extends so far beyond the physical deterioration, right? That healing has made my life so much richer and worthwhile. Not to mention being able to then be someone in the world who can help all of these other deserving people who are in such deep suffering, and to be able to share this polyvagal understanding, whether your suffering is in the mental behavioral health realm or physical or wherever you fall or some combination of all of it. Like this truly helps to explain and gives us a direction for being able to relate in a way that makes sense of what we're experiencing and a path for helping to heal it. So it's such a privilege and an honor to be able to talk to everyone like this. And I look at you, it makes me cry just because I love you all so much. Thanks for sharing this journey with me and being such the vulnerability and willingness to engage in polyvagal theory in front of our audience of people and our members is so beautiful. And it takes a lot of strength to come do that as actively as we do it with everyone. So thank you, all you're incredible women.
And we're hoping everyone, and thank you everyone for joining us. Our next parts of our series will get into some of the biology, a little bit more of the biology of like what happens when, like for Micaela or others of us, I have a different chronic illness journey, how I met Jess and all of that, like what's happening biologically with the autonomic nervous system and all of our, when we don't have neuroregulation of our organs. And then other live streams where it's like, so then how do we harness the body's ability to heal? So what are the pieces that come together to move towards healing, given this picture that's happening? And how do we do that here at OCC? And then the last one is really how to really lean into all of this path of healing and removing any obstacles that there might be to your healing in this journey to health and growth and restoration of our cells and healing, moving to healing. So we hope you can keep joining us on this little journey of our 4 series here.
And pass this on. We hope you'll. This is really designed for anyone in the country is eligible to learn from us and to even receive our care. And our mission has a lot to do with making sure other providers, other people know that this is a direction to look into to help restore health in all the ways we define health. And I would love for as many people as possible, even if they're not working with OCC, to be able to reach for these resources as I did and learn more.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.